Tonight was not an anniversary. Tonight was supposed to be a simple family dinner. She did not know yet that it had been arranged as something else entirely. Katherine Boyd was wearing the pale gold dress she had bought for her 5th wedding anniversary, the one she had never gotten to wear because the anniversary dinner had been cancelled at the last minute. Again, the way most things involving her husband's family had a habit of dissolving before they ever became real. Her mother-in-law, Insuk, stood at the head of the long table in a burgundy hanbok, her hands folded in front of her the way they always were when she was about to say something designed to sound gentle and land like a blade. She looked at Katherine the way she had looked at her for 6 years, the particular expression of a woman auditing a purchase she regretted making. She said, "Katherine, sit. We have something to discuss as a family." Katherine sat. She always sat. She had built an entire marriage out of sitting quietly through rooms that were not designed to hold her. Her husband, Daniel Cho, did not look at her when she sat down. He was 39 years old, the second son of one of Charlotte's wealthiest Korean-American import families, and in 6 years of marriage, Katherine had learned exactly what it meant when Daniel would not meet her eyes. It meant his mother had already told him what to say. Insuk said, "Katherine, you are 40 years old now. We have waited, 6 years, we have waited for a grandchild, and there has been nothing, not one pregnancy, not one moment of hope." She paused, letting the silence do the cutting for her. "Daniel is the only son who can carry this family's name forward properly. You understand this is not personal." Katherine set her champagne glass down very carefully because her hand was shaking too hard to trust it near the crystal. She said, "It is entirely personal. It is my body you are discussing like a defective appliance." Her younger sister Renee sat 2 seats down, twisting a napkin in her lap, saying nothing, the way she had said nothing for 6 years, while Katherine absorbed every insult this family had aimed at her, one careful, deniable sentence at a time. Daniel finally spoke. He said, "Katherine, my mother is right. I need children. It is not fair to either of us to keep pretending this will fix itself." "Fix itself?" Katherine repeated the words like they were foreign in her mouth. "You make it sound like a plumbing issue." Insuk said, "We have already spoken to the doctor. Dr. Whitfield confirmed there is nothing wrong with Daniel. The problem has always been you." Katherine looked around the table. Her own mother, Deborah, sat with her eyes fixed on her plate, refusing to meet her daughter's gaze, because Deborah had spent 6 years believing that a wealthy Korean son-in-law was worth more than her daughter's dignity, and she was not about to start defending her now. Katherine's father had passed 4 years earlier, and in his absence there was no one left at that table who would fight for her. Daniel said the words that ended it. He said, "I want a divorce, Katherine, and I have already spoken to Renee. She has agreed to marry me once the papers are finalized." The room did not go silent. It went loud, a rushing white noise in Katherine's ears, the sound of every certainty she had built her adult life on, collapsing at once. She looked at her sister. Renee still would not lift her eyes from the napkin in her lap, but her jaw was tight, and Katherine understood in that instant that this had not been sprung on Renee tonight. Renee had known. Renee had said yes before Katherine had even walked into the room in her gold dress that had been meant for a happier night. Katherine stood up. Her chair scraped against the marble floor, loud enough that conversation 2 tables over paused. She said, "You built this. All of you, sitting here, decided my worth was measured by a pregnancy test, and when I did not deliver the right result, you passed me off like a returned item and handed my husband to my own sister." Insuk said, without a trace of shame, "You are 40, Katherine. What did you expect? Time was never on your side." Katherine did not cry in that room. She would not give them that. She picked up her purse, and she walked to the door, and only once she was in the hallway of the Cheltenham Grand, alone, with the sound of the party continuing without her behind the closed doors, did the tears come, fast and furious and impossible to stop. She did not go to the wedding 3 weeks later. She did not need to see her sister in white, standing where she had once stood, married to a man whose family had decided a woman's value expired at 40 like a carton of milk. Instead, on the morning of the ceremony, Katherine packed 2 suitcases, left her condo keys with her lawyer, and booked a one-way flight to Seattle, a city where nobody knew her name, where nobody would look at her and see a woman who had failed to reproduce on schedule. She sat in the gate area at Charlotte Douglas International Airport with a paperback novel open on her lap, though she had read the same paragraph 4 times without absorbing a single word. Her eyes were swollen, her hands would not stop trembling. She was thinking about the years she had spent trying, the fertility appointments she had gone to alone because Daniel always had a meeting, the injections she had given herself in hotel bathrooms on business trips, the 2 miscarriages she had never told his family about because she could not bear to watch Insuk's face rearrange itself into false sympathy. She did not notice the man who sat down across from her at the gate until he spoke. He said, "Anna Karenina. Interesting choice for a flight." Katherine looked up. The man was tall, dressed in a dark tailored coat that had no business looking that expensive in an airport lounge. Black hair combed back, eyes that studied her with an unhurried attention she had not felt directed at her in years. He was not smiling exactly, but there was something amused and unbothered in his expression, like a man who had never once in his life worried about how a room perceived him. She said, "It felt appropriate today." He said, "A woman who ruins herself for love, or a woman who refuses to be small for anyone's comfort. Depends which reading you prefer." Katherine closed the book. She said, "I didn't ask for a literary discussion." "No," the man said, leaning back in his seat with the ease of someone who had never once been told no and taken it seriously. "But you got one anyway. I'm Jae-hyun." Katherine did not offer her name back right away. 6 years of marriage into a family that treated her like an inconvenience had taught her to hold pieces of herself back until she understood what a room wanted from her. But something about the way this man, Jae-hyun, sat across from her without checking his phone once, without glancing around the gate area to see who might be watching him, unsettled the careful walls she had spent the morning building. She said, "Katherine, Katherine," he repeated, like he was testing the weight of it. "You've been crying. I have allergies." In an airport in February, he said it flatly, not as an accusation, just an observation laid on the table between them, like a card he wasn't in a hurry to play. Whatever it was, it must have been significant. "You've been holding that book upside down for the last 4 minutes. Katherine looked down. The book was, in fact, upside down. Heat rushed to her face, equal parts embarrassment and something else she could not name, something that felt dangerously close to being seen for the first time in longer than she could remember. She said, "It's been a difficult morning. Do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to distract you from it?" "I don't know you." "That's easily fixed," he said. "I have 4 hours before my flight to Seattle boards. You have, I'm guessing, roughly the same. We could spend it in silence, or we could spend it as 2 strangers who never have to see each other again, which means you can tell me anything, and it costs you nothing." There was a logic to it that Katherine, exhausted and raw and finished pretending she had anything left to protect, found she could not argue with. So she told him, not everything, not at first, but enough. She told him about the dinner, about Insuk's burgundy hanbok and her folded hands, about Daniel's refusal to meet her eyes, about the word fix landing in her chest like a stone. She did not tell him about Renee, not yet. That part still felt too much like a wound, with the stitches freshly pulled. Jae-hyun listened. He did not interrupt her, did not rush to fill silences with reassurance the way people usually did when they wanted a difficult conversation to end faster than it needed to. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "They divorced you because you couldn't give them a child." "Yes. And you're 40. Katherine felt her spine straighten, old defenses rising automatically. "If you're about to tell me 40 is too old for—" "I wasn't going to say that," he said, cutting her off, though not unkindly. "I was going to say that a family who measures a woman's worth by her uterus was never going to be a family worth keeping. You didn't lose something valuable today, Katherine. You got free of people who never understood what they had." She stared at him. Nobody had said anything like that to her in 6 years. Not her mother, who had stayed silent through every insult. Not her friends, most of whom had drifted away once Insuk made it clear that Katherine's marriage came with conditions about who she could remain close to. She said, "You don't know me. You don't know what I had." "No," Jaehyun agreed. "But I know what I'm looking at right now. A woman who just walked away from a wedding cake life that was rotting on the inside, and instead of falling apart in that chair, she's sitting up straight, arguing with a stranger about her own worth. That tells me more than any story could." Something in Katherine's chest loosened, just slightly, the first give in a knot that had been tightening for 6 years. Their flights were called within 20 minutes of each other. Jaehyun stood, buttoned his coat, and said, "I run several businesses out of Seattle. If you're staying there for a while and you find yourself needing dinner with someone who won't ask you when you're planning to have children, call me." He handed her a card, black with silver lettering, no logo, just a name and a number. Jaehyun Bai. Katherine took the card and turned it over in her fingers. She said, "What kind of businesses?" He smiled for the first time, and it changed his whole face, softened something in it that had otherwise looked carved from stone, the kind that don't come up on a first conversation at an airport gate. He picked up his bag. "Good luck in Seattle, Katherine. I have a feeling you're going to need considerably less of it than you think." He walked toward his gate without looking back, the kind of exit that told her he was a man entirely comfortable with not knowing how a story ended, because he trusted that if it mattered, it would find its way back to him. Katherine sat there for a long moment, the black card resting in her palm, and for the first time since she had walked out of the Cheltenham Grand in her gold dress, she felt something other than grief. She felt curious. She felt, faintly, alive. She boarded her flight to Seattle 2 hours later. She did not call the number that week. She told herself it was because she needed time, because a woman did not climb out of the wreckage of a 6-year marriage and immediately fall into the arms of a stranger from an airport gate, no matter how steady his voice had been or how much his eyes had made her feel like she was being looked at instead of assessed. But she kept the card in the inside pocket of every coat she owned that month, like a small dark stone she carried for reasons she could not fully explain to herself. Seattle in February was grey and wet and anonymous in exactly the way Katherine needed it to be. She rented a furnished apartment in Belltown with money from the settlement her lawyer had negotiated, a generous one, because Daniel's family had been eager to close the matter quickly and quietly, eager to erase the 6 years of Katherine's existence from their story before Renee's wedding made headlines in Charlotte's tight-knit Korean-American business circles. She spent her days walking along the waterfront, drinking coffee alone, rebuilding the parts of herself that had gone quiet during her marriage. She did not check her phone for updates from home. She did not want to know what dress her sister wore. 3 weeks after the airport, on a Thursday night when the rain was hammering against her apartment windows and the loneliness had grown too large to sit inside of any longer, Katherine took the black card out of her coat pocket and dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. Before we go further, if this story has already got its hooks in you, hit subscribe now, because what happens next changes everything Katherine thought she knew about second chances, and you do not want to miss where this goes. He answered on the second ring, his voice as unhurried as it had been at the airport gate, as if 3 weeks of silence were nothing at all to a man who measured time differently than most people. He said, "Katherine Boyd, I was beginning to think you'd lost my card." "I almost did," she admitted, "several times. But you didn't." "No." "Good," he said. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night. There's a restaurant on the water in Seattle. Quiet, private room, no cameras. I'll send a car for you at 7. Katherine almost laughed at the ease of it, the casual mention of privacy and cars sent for her, the confidence of a man who had clearly never once had to wonder whether an invitation would be accepted. She said, "You don't know anything about me beyond a conversation at an airport." "I know enough," Jaehyun said. "The rest I intend to learn over dinner. 7 o'clock, Katherine. Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself, not whatever you think I want to see." The car arrived exactly at 7 the following evening, a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who opened her door without a word and drove her to a restaurant tucked into the waterfront, with no sign on the exterior, just a single unmarked black door that a man in a dark suit opened before she could knock. Jaehyun was waiting at a table by the window, the lights of the Seattle harbor scattered like fallen stars across the water behind him. He stood when she entered, which surprised her, an old-fashioned gesture she hadn't experienced in years. He said, "You came." "I said I would." People say a great many things they don't mean. I've learned to notice the ones who follow through. Over dinner, Katherine learned pieces of him the way you learn a language, slowly, through context, rather than direct translation. He did not explain his businesses outright, but he spoke of Seoul and Busan the way other men spoke of neighborhoods they'd grown up 2 streets over from, with the easy familiarity of ownership. He mentioned, in passing, a shipment delayed in Incheon, a meeting he'd need to have with someone in Gangnam the following month, the kind of details that told Katherine, without him ever saying it plainly, that Jaehyun Bae moved through a world with weight and consequence attached to every decision he made. She did not ask what kind of man required a driver, a private room with no cameras, and a voice that made grown men at nearby tables lower their eyes when he glanced their way. Some part of her, the part still raw from a marriage built on family hierarchies and quiet judgments, did not particularly care. Jaehyun looked at her like she was the only interesting thing in the room, and after 6 years of being made to feel like a problem to be solved, that alone was intoxicating. He asked about her marriage only once, gently, and when she told him the whole of it, the miscarriages she'd never disclosed to Daniel's family, the injections in hotel bathrooms, the word fix that still sat lodged behind her ribs like a splinter, Jaehyun's jaw tightened in a way that told her he was a man who did not take insults to people he cared about lightly. He said, 40 is not old, Katherine. 40 is a woman who has survived enough to know exactly what she wants and refuses to accept less. You say that like you know what I want. I know you didn't run to Seattle to hide, he said. You ran here to start over. Those are different things. They saw each other every week after that. Dinner became weekends. Weekends became a shared key to her apartment that she'd never intended to offer, and offering became something neither of them examined too closely because examining it might have required naming what was happening between them, and neither wanted to rush the naming. Jaehyun never once asked her if she could still have children. He never mentioned it, not obliquely, not directly, not in the careful probing way Daniel's family had asked before every holiday dinner, like it was owed to them. When Katherine finally brought it up herself, nervous, bracing for the question underneath the question, Jaehyun had simply said, Katherine, I did not choose you for what your body might do. I chose you for who you already are. 4 months after the airport, on a Tuesday evening in June, with the Seattle sky doing its rare thing of turning entirely gold at sunset, Jaehyun got down on one knee in her apartment. No restaurant, no audience, no cameras, just the two of them and a small black box, and said, "Marry me, Katherine." Not because anyone expects it, not because it makes sense on paper, but because I have never once, in my entire life, wanted to build something with another person the way I want to build a life with you. She said yes, before he'd even finished the sentence. They married in a small ceremony in Busan 2 months later, overlooking the harbor at Hyundai, just the two of them, an officiant, and 2 witnesses Jaehyun trusted completely. Katherine wore ivory, not the gold dress that had been ruined for her in Charlotte, but something new, something chosen entirely for herself. She did not invite her mother. She did not invite Renee. She had blocked every number connected to that life the week she filed for divorce, and she had not looked back since. Not once, not even when curiosity tried to whisper that she should check. She discovered she was pregnant 11 weeks after the wedding, in a bathroom in their Seoul apartment, staring at a test she had almost not bothered to take because 6 years of disappointment had taught her not to hope. When the second line appeared, dark and undeniable, Katherine sat on the bathroom floor and sobbed, not from grief this time, but from something so much larger than relief that she didn't have a name for it. At the 20-week scan, the technician went quiet for a long moment, moving the wand slowly across Katherine's belly, before turning the screen toward her and Jaehyun with a small, careful smile. She said, "I'm seeing 3 heartbeats." Katherine gripped Jaehyun's hand so hard her knuckles went white. Triplets. After 6 years of being told her body had failed at the one job that mattered to a family who had never deserved her loyalty in the first place, her body had produced not 1 miracle, but 3. Jaehyun looked at the screen, then at Katherine, and for the first time since she'd known him, this composed, unshakable man who ran empires most people never saw the edges of, had tears in his eyes. If Katherine's triumph is giving you chills, you know what to do. Subscribe now, because the reckoning that's coming for her ex-husband's family is going to be worth every second of the wait. The triplets arrived on a bright March morning at a private hospital in Seoul, 2 girls and a boy, born 6 weeks after Katherine's 41st birthday, each of them announced into the world with a fierce, healthy cry that made the delivery room nurses laugh with relief. Jaehyun named the boy after his late grandfather. Katherine named the girls after her own grandmother, a woman from Georgia who had raised 6 children on a sharecropper's wages and never once let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. It felt right, weaving that resilience into the next generation, especially now, especially after everything. The first year with 3 infants was chaos in the truest sense, a blur of bottles and sleepless nights, and Jaehyun coming home from meetings, still in his tailored coat, to rock a crying infant at 3 in the morning without complaint, without once acting like fatherhood was beneath a man of his position. He hired help, of course, a full staff for the penthouse in Seoul's Hanam-dong district, but he was present in a way Daniel had never once managed to be, even for something as small as a dinner reservation. Katherine watched him with their children and felt something settle permanently into place inside her, a certainty that she had not simply escaped one life, she had built an entirely better one from the wreckage of it. She did not tell her family, not when she got married, not when she found out she was pregnant, not when the triplets were born. She had blocked every number, deleted every email address, and instructed her lawyer that any correspondence from Charlotte was to be returned unopened. It was not cruelty, or at least she did not experience it that way. It was self-preservation. A woman who had spent 6 years being measured and found lacking by people who shared her blood did not owe those people access to her joy. Let them wonder, let them imagine whatever story they wanted about where Katherine Boyd had disappeared to. She was done explaining herself to anyone. 2 years passed like this, quiet and full and entirely hers. The triplets grew from wobbling toddlers into small, loud, curious people who filled the Hanam-dong penthouse with the kind of noise Katherine had once been told she would never be capable of producing. Jaehyun's businesses, whatever their full shape truly was, thrived and expanded, and Katherine learned, slowly and without ever being told outright, that her husband commanded a level of respect in certain rooms that bordered on fear. She did not ask questions she suspected she did not want the full answers to. She had built her peace carefully, and she intended to protect it. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in April, while Katherine sat on the floor of the nursery helping her daughters stack wooden blocks into a tower that kept collapsing under their small, determined hands, her phone rang from a number she did not recognize, a Charlotte area code she had not seen in over 2 years. She almost let it go to voicemail. Some old and stubborn thread of curiosity she thought she had cut clean, made her answer instead. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, a shaky inhale, and then a voice that made every muscle in Katherine's body go rigid at once. "Katherine, please don't hang up. It's me. It's Renee." Katherine sat very still on the nursery floor, one of her daughters tugging at her sleeve, asking for more blocks, the sound distant and underwater in her ears. She said, "How did you get this number?" "I hired someone," Renee said, her voice cracking. "A private investigator. I know that's insane. I know I have no right. But Katherine, please, just listen to me for 1 minute. Just 1 minute, and then I swear I will never call again if that's what you want." "You have 30 seconds. Renee's breath hitched on the other end, and when she spoke again, the words tumbled out fast, desperate, like she'd been rehearsing them for months, and was terrified of losing her nerve. "I've been married to Daniel for 2 years now, Katherine. 2 years, and I haven't gotten pregnant. Not once. Not even a scare." Her voice broke fully now. "His mother looks at me the exact same way she used to look at you, like I'm broken, like I've failed some test I never even agreed to take." Katherine closed her eyes. Some old, tired part of her wanted to feel nothing, wanted this call to slide off her like rain off a window. But another part of her, the part that had once sat across from this same sister at 100 family dinners, that had shared a childhood bedroom with her in Charlotte, that part felt something twist uncomfortably in her chest, despite everything. "I did an investigation," Renee said, the words rushing now, unstoppable. "I hired someone to look at medical records, discreetly, through a contact of Daniel's own aunt who's a nurse. Katherine, it's not me. It was never me, and I don't think it was ever you either. It's Daniel. He can't have children. There's a condition, something with his sperm count. It's been documented for years. His family has known. They've known this whole time, and instead of confronting it, they let both of us take the blame for something that was never our fault." The blocks in Katherine's daughter's small hands clattered to the floor as the child grew bored and wandered off toward her siblings, and in the sudden quiet of the nursery, Katherine felt the entire architecture of her old life groan and shift beneath her, 6 years of humiliation reorganizing itself around a single, devastating fact. "I'm sorry," Renee said, sobbing openly now. "I'm so sorry, Katherine, for marrying him, for not standing up for you at that dinner, for every single time I sat quiet while they tore you apart. I was a coward, and I have thought about it every single day for 2 years, and I need you to know that I know exactly what I did to you." Katherine sat on the nursery floor of a penthouse in Seoul, surrounded by the evidence of a life she had built entirely without her family's blessing or knowledge, and found that she could not immediately speak. Katherine has every reason to hang up right now, but what she decides to do next is the twist you did not see coming. Subscribe so you don't miss. Katherine finally found her voice, low and steady, though her hands were trembling around the phone. "Say that again, slowly. Tell me exactly what you found." Renee did, laying it out with the precision of someone who had spent months building a case she was terrified would never be believed. A fertility specialist's report, obtained through a cousin who worked in medical records at the clinic Daniel's family had always used. A diagnosis buried in his file for years, a condition affecting sperm viability, something Daniel had known about since he was 26 years old, long before he had ever met Katherine, long before he had stood across a dinner table and let his mother call her defective in front of 200 wedding guests. He knew, Katherine said, the words tasting like ash. He knew, this entire time, and he let his mother divorce me on his behalf. They all knew, Renee said. Or at least, I think Insuk suspected. There's no way she didn't, but it was easier to blame you. It's always easier to blame the woman. Katherine ended the call 20 minutes later with a promise, not of forgiveness, not yet, but of a conversation still to come. She sat on the nursery floor for a long time after, staring at nothing, while her children's laughter drifted from the next room where the nanny had taken over the block tower. When Jaehyun came home that evening, he found her at the kitchen island with a glass of wine untouched in front of her, staring out at the lights of Hanamdong. He set his coat over the back of a chair and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I got a phone call today," Katherine said, "from Renee." Jaehyun's expression did not change dramatically, but something in his posture sharpened, the way a man's does when he senses a threat approaching something he has sworn to protect. He said, "Tell me everything." She did. All of it. The diagnosis, the years of buried medical records, the family's willful blindness, Renee's tears, and her confession of cowardice. Jaehyun listened without interrupting, the same way he had at the airport gate 2 years earlier, but by the time Katherine finished, his jaw had set into a hard, controlled line that she had only seen a handful of times, always right before someone in one of his organizations learned the true cost of crossing him. He said, "What do you want to do?" Katherine thought about the question longer than she expected to. She thought about the dinner at the Cheltenham Grand, about Insuk's folded hands and burgundy handbook, about the word fix that had haunted her for 6 years. She thought about her mother's silence, her father's absence, the 2 years of joy she had built in a life none of them knew existed, and she thought about Renee, 29 years old now, sitting in the exact chair Katherine had once occupied, being measured by the same cruel scale, blamed for a failure that had never belonged to her. "I want to go home," Katherine finally said. "I want to walk into that family with everything they told me I could never have, and I want them to understand, completely and without any room for denial, exactly what they did." Jae-yun studied her for a long moment, and then something shifted in his expression, a quiet, fierce pride that Katherine felt in her chest like warmth spreading through cold water. He said, "Then we go home, as a family." Before they left, Katherine called the fertility doctor she and Daniel had used for years back in Charlotte, Dr. Whitfield, the same physician Insuk had cited at that dinner as proof that the problem had always been Katherine. She had not spoken to him since the divorce. When his office answered and eventually put him through, Katherine identified herself and asked him directly, professionally, whether Daniel Cho's medical file contained any documentation regarding fertility impairment predating their marriage. There was a long pause on the line, the particular silence of a man weighing patient confidentiality against a truth that had already been dragged into the light by someone else's investigation. Finally, Dr. Whitfield said, carefully, "Katherine, I can't discuss another patient's specific records without consent. But I will say this, when you and Daniel came to me 6 years ago, I ran full panels on both of you. Your results were entirely normal, every marker, and I strongly recommended a follow-up consultation for Daniel regarding certain findings. He declined further testing. That recommendation is documented. I'm sorry I never had cause to share that with you directly." Katherine thanked him and hung up, her hands finally steady for the first time all day. The flight to Charlotte was booked for the following week, timed deliberately. Renee had mentioned, almost as an aside during their second phone call, that the extended family was gathering that Saturday for what Insuk had framed as a show of support for Renee during this difficult time, a dinner at the same banquet hall, the Cheltenham Grand, where 2 years earlier, Katherine had been discarded like a returned item over champagne and candlelight. Insuk, Renee said, had spent the last several weeks subjecting her to the same slow, deliberate campaign of blame she had once aimed at Katherine, careful comments about diet, about stress, about whether Renee was trying hard enough, each one calibrated to sound like concern while functioning as an accusation. Katherine did not tell Renee she was coming. She wanted the moment to be unannounced, unrehearsed, impossible to prepare a defense against. She packed for herself and the children, and Jaehyun made a single phone call to his private security team, not because he anticipated danger, but because a man who moved through the world as he did not walk into any room, however personal, without ensuring every variable was accounted for. The night before their flight, Katherine stood in the nursery, watching her 3 children sleep, their small chests rising and falling in the soft blue light of the nightlight, and she thought about the woman she had been at that dinner table 2 years ago, swallowing insult after insult, believing on some deep and terrible level that perhaps they were right about her. That woman was gone. What remained in her place had been built in Seoul, in the 4 months of Jaehyun's steady attention, in the 9 months of carrying 3 lives inside her body that everyone had once insisted did not exist within her capacity, in 2 years of a marriage built on respect instead of hierarchy. She was ready to walk back through that door. Besties, the confrontation is coming, and you will not believe how Insuk reacts when she sees what Katherine is walking in with. Subscribe now so you're there for it. The Cheltenham Grand looked exactly as Katherine remembered it, crystal chandeliers throwing warm light across white tablecloths, the same marble floor that had scraped beneath her chair the night her marriage ended in front of 200 witnesses. Nothing about the room had changed. Katherine had changed everything about herself. She stood in the hallway outside the private banquet room with Jaehyun beside her, his hand resting at the small of her back, steady and grounding, while 2 nannies waited nearby with the triplets, now toddling on their own sturdy legs, dressed in soft ivory outfits Katherine had chosen with exquisite, deliberate care. Through the closed doors, she could hear the low murmur of the gathered family, the clink of glasses, and beneath it, unmistakable even through the wood, Insuk's voice, sharp and performing concern, in the exact tone Katherine remembered too well. It's simply a matter of effort, Renee. Some women have to try harder than others. Have you considered that perhaps you are too stressed at work? Stress closes the body to possibility. Katherine felt Jaehyun's hand tighten slightly against her back. She looked up at him, and he gave her the smallest nod, an unspoken confirmation that whenever she was ready, he was ready to walk in beside her. She pushed the doors open herself. The room went quiet in stages, the way a wave rolls in rather than crashes all at once. First, the people nearest the door noticed her, a ripple of recognition and confusion. Then Deborah, Katherine's mother, seated near the head table, went pale, her wineglass frozen halfway to her lips. Then Insuk turned, her burgundy dress this time instead of the hanbok, her expression sliding from irritation at the interruption into something like disbelief as she registered exactly who was standing in the doorway. And then the toddlers came through behind her, one of the nannies carrying the youngest girl on her hip, the other 2 holding hands as they toddled forward, curious and unbothered by the sudden silence in the room, and the entire banquet hall seemed to collectively stop breathing. Katherine, Insuk said, the name coming out strangled, like it had cost her something physical to say it. What is this? These, Katherine said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room, are my children. She watched the information land across the table in real time, watched faces shift from confusion to shock to something closer to horror as the math assembled itself behind their eyes. 3 children, roughly 2 years old. Katherine, 42 now, the woman they had all agreed was too old, too broken, too incapable of producing exactly this. Renee stood up from her seat so fast her chair nearly toppled, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears already spilling before she'd said a single word. "Katherine," she breathed, "you came." "I came," Katherine confirmed, "because you called me and told me the truth, and because I think everyone at this table deserves to hear it too." Daniel had gone rigid in his seat at the far end of the table, his face draining of color as his eyes moved from the children to Katherine to the tall, composed man standing just behind her, whose presence alone seemed to be recalibrating something in the air of the room, a quiet authority that made even Insuk's confident posture falter slightly. "Who?" Insuk said slowly, looking at Jaehoon with the particular scrutiny of a woman assessing threat and status simultaneously. "Is this?" "My husband," Katherine said. Jaehoon Bae. The name landed differently than Katherine expected. She watched several of the older relatives at the table, businessmen with connections across the Korean-American trade community, go very still, exchanging glances that told her Jaehoon's name carried weight in rooms far beyond the ones she had personally witnessed. One older man near the back, a cousin of Daniel's father, actually stood halfway from his chair before catching himself, his face gone the color of ash. Insuk recovered first, though her voice had lost its earlier command. "You are 42 years old, Katherine. How is this possible? How did I what?" Katherine said, stepping fully into the room now, her children gathering near her legs, small and warm, and undeniable proof standing against every word this family had ever used to diminish her. "How did I manage to do the one thing you all insisted I was incapable of? I didn't do anything different, Insuk. I simply left a family that had already decided my worth before I ever walked through their door, and I found people who saw me as whole instead of broken." Daniel finally spoke, his voice thin and unsteady. "Katherine, I didn't think you'd actually. You didn't think I'd move on?" Katherine turned to face him directly, for the first time since walking in. "Or you didn't think the truth would ever catch up to you?" The room shifted again, this time toward confusion, several relatives glancing between Daniel and Katherine, not yet understanding what she meant. "Renee found something," Katherine said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, deliberately, surgically. "A medical file, years old. It seems the fertility specialist this family has trusted for over a decade documented a condition in Daniel long before he ever married me. A condition affecting his ability to father children. He knew, he has always known." She let the words settle before continuing. "And instead of confronting that truth, this family chose to blame 2 different women in 2 different marriages for a problem that was never ours to carry." The silence that followed was total. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on a room and everyone inside it. Insuk's face had gone rigid, her carefully composed features cracking at the edges as she turned to look at her son. "Daniel, tell me this is not true." Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was its own confession, spreading across the table like spilled wine, staining everything it touched. If you thought the confrontation was over, wait until you see what happens next. Subscribe now, because the fallout is about to hit every single person. Deborah rose slowly from her seat, her napkin sliding off her lap, unnoticed to the floor. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, in a way Katherine could not remember her mother doing in years, and when she spoke, her voice had none of its usual careful diplomacy. "Katherine, is this true? Did you know, this whole time, and you never—" "I didn't know until 3 weeks ago," Katherine said. "Renee found out and called me. I confirmed it myself with Dr. Whitfield. It's documented, Mother. It's real. And none of you thought to question it. None of you thought maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't the woman sitting at the table. We trusted the doctors, Insuk said, though her voice had lost all its earlier steel, thin now, brittle. We had no reason to think. You had every reason, Katherine said. You had a son who refused follow-up testing 6 years ago, Dr. Whitfield told me himself. Daniel declined further evaluation after his initial results raised concerns. That was documented too. Nobody had to guess, Insuk. Somebody simply chose not to ask. Daniel's father, a quiet man named Jung-ho who had rarely spoken during the years of Katherine's marriage, set down his glass with a sharp click against the table. He looked at his son with an expression Katherine had never seen him wear, something between disgust and grief. He said, in Korean, low and furious, a sentence Katherine didn't fully catch, but understood entirely from the way Daniel flinched under it. Renee crossed the room before anyone else moved, closing the distance between herself and Katherine in quick, unsteady steps, and for a moment, Katherine thought her sister might simply collapse into her arms the way she used to when they were girls, sharing a bedroom in Charlotte. Renee stopped just short of her, hands hovering, uncertain whether she still had the right to reach for her sister at all. "I am so sorry," Renee said, the words breaking apart as she said them. "For all of it. For sitting quiet at that table 2 years ago. For marrying him at all. For every single time I let this family tear you down and said nothing because I was afraid of becoming the next target. I should have stood up for you. I should have believed you were enough exactly as you were." Katherine looked at her sister for a long moment, feeling the old ache and the new distance sitting side by side inside her chest. She said, "I'm not here for revenge against you, Renee. I came because you told me the truth when you didn't have to, and because I think you deserve better than what this family gave both of us." She paused, "But I'm not going to pretend the last 2 years didn't happen either. That's going to take time." Renee nodded quickly, tears streaming freely now, grateful for even that much. Insuk, however, was not finished. She rose from her seat, composing herself with visible effort, and turned to Katherine with the particular tone of someone attempting to salvage authority from the wreckage of a room that had already stopped listening to her. "Katherine, whatever has happened, whatever mistakes were made, you cannot simply walk in here after 2 years of silence and expect—" "I don't expect anything from you," Katherine said, cutting her off with a calm that landed harder than any raised voice could have. "I didn't come here for your approval, Insuk. I stopped needing that the day I got on a plane to Seattle. I came here so that Renee would not spend the next 6 years of her life the way I spent mine, being told her body had failed a family that had already failed her first." She looked around the table slowly, meeting the eyes of relatives who had once sat comfortably through her humiliation, sipping wine while Insuk dismantled her worth, one careful sentence at a time. None of them held her gaze for long. "You had a chance," Katherine continued, "to be a family that protected its own instead of sacrificing one woman after another to protect a man's pride. You chose wrong every single time, and now you have to live with what that choice cost you. Not just me, Renee too. 2 years of her life she can never get back, spent being blamed for something that was never hers to carry." Jae-hyun stepped forward then, not aggressively, but with a quiet, deliberate presence that immediately drew every eye in the room. He said nothing directly to the family. He simply crouched down and lifted his youngest daughter into his arms, the toddler immediately settling against his shoulder with the easy trust of a child who had never once been made to feel like an inconvenience. And the image of it, this powerful, composed man holding a child that Katherine had been told she was incapable of producing, seemed to finish whatever argument words alone could not. Insuk's eyes moved from the child to Katherine, and something in her expression finally, fully broke. Not into apology exactly, but into something adjacent to it, the recognition of a battle thoroughly and permanently lost. she said, quietly. I was wrong about you. Yes, Katherine said simply. You were. She did not stay for dinner. She had not come for reconciliation with the family as a whole, only for Renee, and for the truth. She gathered her children, thanked the nannies, and walked back toward the doors of the Cheltenham Grand, with Jae-hyun beside her, carrying their daughter, the same doors Katherine had walked through in tears 2 years earlier, believing herself broken beyond repair. Behind her, she heard Deborah's voice, thick with tears, calling her name, asking her to wait, to talk, to give her a chance to make things right. Katherine paused at the threshold, but did not turn around. I'll call you next week, Mother, she said. Not because you deserve it yet, because Renee does, and I don't want to lose her the way I lost the rest of you. Then she walked out into the Charlotte evening, her husband beside her, her children in her arms, and did not look back at the room that had once told her exactly what she was worth. One more powerful sense left, and it's the emotional payoff you've been waiting for. Subscribe now so you catch it the moment it drops. 6 months passed before Katherine spoke to her mother again in more than clipped, careful phone calls. It happened slowly, the way most real repair does, not through a single dramatic conversation, but through a series of small ones, Deborah calling on Sunday afternoons just to hear the triplets babbling in the background, Katherine allowing the calls to run a little longer each time, testing whether the woman on the other end had actually changed or was simply performing change the way In-suk once performed concern. Deborah flew to Seoul that autumn, alone, without asking permission to come, without expecting forgiveness to be handed to her on arrival. She sat on the floor of the nursery with her grandchildren for the first time, tears running freely down her face, and said only, I should have chosen you a long time ago, Katherine. I am so sorry it took losing you to understand that. Katherine did not tell her it was fine. It was not fine. But she let her mother stay for 2 weeks, and by the end of it, something small and fragile had begun rebuilding itself between them. Not the relationship they'd once had, but the start of something more honest. Renee's divorce from Daniel finalized within 4 months of that dinner at the Cheltenham Grand. The medical documentation, once exposed, could not be unseen by a family that prided itself on appearances above almost everything else. Daniel's father, Young-ho, quietly withdrew financial support from his son's business ventures, a punishment more devastating to Daniel than any public shame could have been. And within a year, the golden second son, who had once discarded a wife for the crime of not conceiving on schedule, found himself with neither wife, nor family backing, nor the reputation he had spent his whole life curating. In-suk, for her part, retreated from the social circles she had once dominated, her name quietly excised from the guest lists and charity boards where she had built her identity for 30 years. Katherine felt no satisfaction in that particular unraveling, only a distant, settled recognition that consequences, when finally allowed to land, tended to land precisely where they belonged. Renee moved to Seattle 8 months later, close enough to visit Katherine and the children regularly, but far enough to build a life that was entirely her own for the first time since she'd been old enough to understand what her family expected of her. She started therapy. She started painting again, something she had loved as a teenager, and abandoned the moment In-suk declared it an impractical hobby unbecoming of a future daughter-in-law. She and Katherine rebuilt their relationship carefully, unevenly, with long stretches of easy laughter, interrupted occasionally by the old grief. Neither of them fully outran, but they rebuilt it, brick by careful brick, the way anything worth keeping has to be rebuilt after it's been broken. Katherine and Jae-hyun's life in Seoul continued exactly as it had before the confrontation, full and loud and entirely theirs. The triplets grew, fierce and curious, utterly unbothered by the storm that had once surrounded their existence, filling the Hanam-dong penthouse with a chaos Katherine had once been told her body would never be capable of creating. Jae-hyun remained, as he always had, unshaken by the world's opinion of him, present at every bath time and bedtime story his schedule allowed, a father who measured his worth by his presence rather than his position. One evening, nearly a year after that dinner at the Cheltenham Grand, Katherine sat on the balcony of their penthouse, watching the lights of Seoul spread out beneath her, a glass of wine in her hand, her children finally asleep after a long, joyful, exhausting day. Jae-hyun joined her, settling into the chair beside her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, comfortable in the particular silence that belongs only to people who have built something real together. "Do you ever think about them?" Jae-hyun asked eventually. "Daniel's family, what happened to them?" Katherine considered the question honestly before answering. "Sometimes, not with anger anymore though, more like remembering a storm you survived. It shaped everything that came after, but it doesn't control me the way it used to." "You could have stayed angry," Jae-hyun said. "Nobody would have blamed you." "I could have," Katherine agreed, "but anger is heavy, and I've carried enough heavy things. I'd rather carry this instead." She gestured toward the penthouse behind them, toward the sound of her children's soft breathing, drifting from the open nursery window, toward the man beside her who had never once asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. She thought, sometimes, about the woman she had been at 40, sitting in a gold dress she never got to properly wear, being told by people who shared her blood that her worth had an expiration date. She thought about how close she had come to believing them, how easily a lifetime of careful cruelty can convince a person that they are the problem, rather than simply a person who has not yet found the right room to stand in. She had found that room. Not by fixing anything about herself, because there had never been anything broken to fix, but by walking away from people who required her to shrink in order to be tolerated, and toward a life built on the radical, simple premise that she had always been enough exactly as she was. The lights of Seoul stretched out below them, endless and glittering, and Katherine leaned into her husband's shoulder, her wine glass resting forgotten on the table beside her, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, entirely and completely at peace. This story is fiction, but it speaks to a truth many women carry quietly, the particular cruelty of being blamed for something never within your control, and the particular power of walking away from people who require your smallness to feel comfortable. If any part of Katherine's story moved you, if it made you think of your own worth, or someone else's, sit with that feeling. Let it change how you see the people around you. If this story reached you, subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs the reminder that it is never too late to be chosen, to be believed, and to build a life that belongs entirely to you. Until next time, stay strong, stay whole, and never let anyone convince you that you were ever the problem.